The spaceship rattled like a broken washing machine on spin cycle, a comforting reminder that nothing in the galaxy worked as advertised. Dr. Myra Quell hunched over her terminal, her fingers dancing over controls, as the ship lurched towards the crucible, the delightful hellhole of scrap metal and gladiatorial politics floating in the cold void. "So, what have we cocked up now, Myra?" rasped Tomlin, the ship's pilot and chief sarcasm officer, squinting at the looming silhouette of the asteroid arena. His face bore the grimace of a man who'd given up on all humanity, or at least the bits that couldn't operate a spaceship. "Oh, Myra shrugged, her eyes glued to the data spilling across the screen, just unleashed a bioengineered bacteria with a personality disorder. No biggie. The bacteria, meant to be a cleanup crew for toxic elements, had decided to moonlight as a terraformer, not your garden variety oopsie. Terraforming, Tomlin snorted. "Guess we won't be invited to any eco-friendly dinner parties." Myra smirked. "I hear the hors d'oeuvres would leave something to be desired anyway." The rest of the crew, a ragtag bunch that could generously be described as specialists, were scattered across the cramped cabin, each absorbed in their own part of the impending disaster. There was Bale, the overly enthusiastic engineer who looked like he might try to high-five a supernova if given the chance, and Kim, the communications officer, who could charm a snake off its belly, though today she just looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "We're approaching the crucible," Tomlin announced, not that anyone needed reminding, as the ship gave another enthusiastic jiggle. "Any brilliant last words, Myra?" "Yeah," she replied, straightening up. "Try not to die. It would really mess with my research schedule." The crucible loomed large now, its jagged spires silhouetted against the backdrop of space, like the universe's idea of a bad joke, a testament to human ingenuity and its complete lack of taste. The place was a meeting point for the galaxy's finest assholes, all eager to watch battles, make deals, and occasionally not kill each other. "Why do I get the feeling this isn't going to end with us a hero's welcome?" Bale asked, his voice tinged with the kind of optimism that only engineers and naive children could muster. "Because it won't," Myra said, the words slipping out before she'd even thought them. "They want answers, and I doubt Oops is going to cut it." Tomlin brought the ship in with the grace of a drunken uncle attempting a wedding speech. They docked with a metallic thunk that suggested they wouldn't be leaving in a hurry. "Here we go, ladies and gentlemen," Tomlin announced, unbuckling with a flourish. "Welcome to the Galactic Coliseum. Try not to get stabbed." The crew disembarked, stepping into the stale, metallic air of the crucible. The hallways twisted and turned, lined with vendors hawking everything from alien delicacies to weapons that probably shouldn't be sold with such enthusiasm. "I feel like we're in a bad episode of one of those space opera dramas," Kim muttered, nudging Myra as they made their way to the designated meeting chamber. "If only," Myra replied. "Those have happy endings." They reached the chamber, a cavernous room filled with delegates and diplomats, each more self-important than the last. At the center was a dais, where a holographic image of their little terraforming accident spun slowly, like a planet caught in the act of indecent exposure. "Dr. Quell," boomed a voice from the front. A tall, reptilian figure with scales that shimmered like oil on water, Galtok, one of the Crucible's leading members. "Would you care to explain why your bacteria is turning our research planet into a nature preserve?" Myra stepped forward, feigning confidence like a politician on election day. "It was a miscalculation," she began. "Miscalculation?" Galtok's eyes narrowed, a feat considering they were already the size of dinner plates. "Your creation is rewriting the ecosystem. Think of it as evolution with a sense of humor," Myra quipped, earning a disapproving glance from Kim. "Look, the bacteria was supposed to break down pollutants, not redecorate. And yet here we are," Galtok replied. "The planet is off-limits until further notice. Until we have answers, the Crucible demands accountability." Tomlin leaned over to Myra, whispering, "Think they know accountability is just a fancy word for scapegoat?" SHH, Myra hissed back. Play nice or they might make us the entertainment. The meeting dragged on, filled with debates, accusations, and a distinct lack of anyone actually offering solutions. It was enough to make Myra wish for the simple chaos of a bacterial outbreak. After what felt like an eternity, they were dismissed, the crew retreating to their ship with the weight of impending doom hanging over them. That went well, Bale said brightly, earning a collective groan from the others. I've had dental cleanings that were less painful, Kim muttered. And cheaper, Tomlin added. Back on the ship, Myra slumped into her chair, her mind racing with possibilities and none of them good. They were in deep, and the only way out was to figure out how to stop a microscopic army of terraformers hell-bent on redecorating the universe. So, Captain, what's the plan? Tomlin asked, his usual sarcasm replaced with genuine curiosity. Myra rubbed her temples, the throbbing in her head matching the erratic pulse of the ship's engines. We need to find a way to reverse the bacteria's effects, she said, or at least convince everyone we're trying. And if we can't, Bale asked, his eyes wide with the innocence only the truly deluded could maintain. Myra sighed. Then we hope our next career involves less scrutiny and more hiding under rocks. The ship hummed around them, its familiar sounds a temporary balm against the chaos they faced. They had unleashed something truly monstrous, and the galaxy wasn't known for its forgiveness. As the stars streaked past the windows, Myra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, judged by the indifferent cosmos. You ever wonder if the universe is just waiting for us to screw up again? She mused aloud. Oh, definitely, Tomlin replied, leaning back with a smirk. But hey, at least we're giving it a good show. With that, the ship slipped back into the void, their path uncertain, but their mission clear: fix what they'd broken or become the latest victims of cosmic irony. The crucible's air smelled like desperation and reheated alien cuisine, an aroma that would make a trash planet smell like a blooming meadow. The team trudged through its labyrinthine corridors, the atmosphere heavy with the kind of tension that preceded either a diplomatic breakthrough or an epic bar brawl. Not that there was much difference here. Tomlin, leading the way, glanced back at his crew. Remember, folks, if we screw this up, we're not just out of a job, we're out of a galaxy. Ah, optimism, Kim said dryly, her voice the verbal equivalent of an eye roll. Just what I needed today. Who needs optimism when you have a bacteria problem that's more persistent than my ex? Bale chimed in, his attempt at levity earning him only a sigh from Myra. The meeting room they finally found themselves in was populated by representatives from various species, each nursing their own personal grudges and grievances. No one looked particularly happy, but then, happiness was an alien concept in these parts. Humans, a gruff voice snarled, coming from a squat, amphibious creature who looked like he'd been pulled out of a swamp and given a suit 2 sizes too small. Always bringing chaos to the cosmos. Great, we're in a room with a comedian, Tomlin muttered, earning a withering glance from Myra. At the center of the chaos was Vorin, an enigmatic alien strategist whose reputation was as colorful as his iridescent skin. He gestured for silence, his presence commanding attention like a school principal about to hand out detention slips. Myra Quell, Vorin began, his voice smooth yet carrying the weight of authority. Your bacteria threatens not just one planet but potentially the entire system if it reaches Treller Prime. Ah yes, Treller Prime, Myra said, folding her arms. The jewel of the galaxy, or so I hear. Never been, but I imagine it's nice this time of year. Nice or not, it holds resources crucial to several factions, Vorin continued, unfazed by her sarcasm. Resources that, should they become contaminated, could spark conflicts spanning light years. Well, no pressure then, Tomlin interjected, flashing a grin that was more grimace than smile. Vorin fixed his gaze on Tomlin, eyes narrowing. I trust you understand the severity of this situation. Severe like a hangover after cheap space whiskey, Tomlin replied, refusing to be cowed by the alien's glare. A murmur ran through the gathered delegates, some of whom looked ready to sign a petition to send the humans on a one-way trip to a black hole. Myra felt the weight of their stares, each one a silent accusation. "So what do you propose we do?" Myra asked, her tone edging into desperate territory. "We're open to suggestions, even if they involve something more creative than 'please go away and never come back.'" Vorin paused, considering. "There is a solution, but it is risky and requires a delicate hand. Delicate us. You've seen how we dock a ship, right?" Bale whispered to Kim, who responded with a subtle elbow to his ribs. "The bacteria," Vorin continued, ignoring the side commentary, "can be countered with an inverse strain, but synthesizing it requires access to the Crucible's biolabs and cooperation from several factions." "Cooperation," Kim said, her voice dripping with irony. "Because nothing says unity like a room full of aliens who'd rather slit each other's throats." "And what's in it for them?" Tomlin asked, ever the realist when it came to galactic politics. "Besides not having their planets turned into nature documentaries." Vorin inclined his head, acknowledging the point. "Access to advanced Terran technology, consultation on resource management, and of course your assurance that this incident will not repeat itself." "Advanced Terran technology," Tomlin repeated, shaking his head. "They do know our ship runs on duct tape and prayer, right?" Myra sighed, looking at her crew. "All right, let's say we get these factions to play nice. What's the plan for synthesizing this inverse strain?" "You will need to navigate the Crucible's bureaucracies, secure access to the labs, and gather the necessary components," Vorin explained, his voice even as if he were discussing the weather. "Simple, really." "Simple," Myra repeated, her voice flat. "Like juggling plasma grenades." The meeting adjourned with no shortage of side-eye and muttered curses in languages Myra was quite happy not to understand. The crew reconvened outside, leaning against the cold metal walls. "Well, that was fun," Bale said, his perpetual good cheer unwavering. "Where do we start?" "By finding someone who doesn't hate our guts," Kim suggested. "Might narrow the field considerably." Tomlin chuckled, crossing his arms. "Incredible, we've gone from scientists to galaxy-saving diplomats. No job too small, no paycheck too large." Myra pinched the bridge of her nose, already feeling the onset of a headache that would probably require an interstellar dosage of painkillers. "First things first, we need allies. Someone with influence who isn't already drafting our execution warrants." They set off, the chaotic corridors of the Crucible their stage, their audience a cast of thousands who would rather see them fail. The task was monumental, but they had no choice. Failure wasn't just an option, it was a certainty unless they pulled off a miracle wrapped in a disaster. Their first stop was a bar because of course it was. If there was one universal truth, it was that deals were often made and occasionally broken over drinks. The place was a riot of color and noise, with patrons from a dozen worlds engaged in a symphony of drunken revelry. "Look at it this way," Tomlin said, sliding onto a stool. "If we mess up here, at least the drinks are strong enough to knock out a Rylothian rhino." "Charming," Kim commented, nodding to the bartender, a multi-limbed entity who managed to serve drinks with a speed that suggested caffeine was its primary nutrient. "Here's to our impending doom," Bale toasted, raising a glass of something that glowed an unsettling shade of green. Myra shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You know, when I signed up for interplanetary research, I didn't think I'd be one bad decision away from sparking a war." "Live and learn," Tomlin said, clinking his glass against hers. "Or live and screw up royally. Either way, it's educational." As they plotted their next move, a figure approached, slipping onto the stool beside Myra. Tall and slender, with eyes that seemed to absorb light and a cloak that flowed around them like shadow. "Dr. Quell, I presume," the figure said, voice smooth as polished glass. "And you are?" Myra asked, wary of any stranger who knew her name in a place like this. "Call me Rax," the stranger replied, a hint of amusement threading through his tone. "I hear you're in need of some friends." Tomlin snorted. If by friends you mean people who won't shoot us on sight, then yes, we're hiring. Rax chuckled, a low sound that was almost reassuring. I have connections and an interest in seeing Treller Prime remain its resource-rich self. What's the catch? Myra asked, because there was always a catch. Rax spread his hands, innocence personified. No catch, just a mutual interest. And perhaps a favor owed down the line. Of course, Kim said, rolling her eyes. Because favors in this place aren't likely to bite us in the ass later. We're in no position to be choosy, Myra pointed out, meeting Rax's gaze. All right, let's talk. As they settled into negotiations, the Crucible continued its usual chaotic dance around them. Deals were made, alliances formed and broken, all under the watchful gaze of a universe that spun on, uncaring and indifferent. And somewhere out there, Myra knew the bacteria continued its relentless advance, setting the stage for a disaster of their own making. But for now they had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one, and a chance, slim as it might be, to set things right. To making things right, Myra said, raising her glass once more. Or at least to making them less wrong, Tomlin corrected, clinking his glass against hers. In the grim darkness of the galaxy, it was the small victories that counted. And if those victories came with a side of dark humor and a stiff drink, well, that was just the way of the world, or the universe as it were. The bar, as bars go in this part of the galaxy, was less a place to drown your sorrows and more a hub for creating new ones. Myra, Tomlin, Bale, and Kim sat around the table, their drinks attempting to outshine the neon chaos around them. Rax had left with the promise of shaking some trees and seeing what fell out, which meant they had a short window to nurse drinks and their steadily declining hope. Can you believe this? Myra said, swirling her glass of something that promised more regret than refreshment. We went from lab coats to potential war criminals in less than a week. Ah, but think of the resume, Bale quipped, lifting his drink in faux celebration. When this is over, we can write adventurer under skills. Yeah, I'm sure that'll impress the Galactic Parole Board, Kim added, her sarcasm as dry as the Sahara. Tomlin leaned back in his chair, surveying the room. Say what you will about space diplomacy, at least it keeps the adrenaline pumping. Not unlike jumping out of an airlock without a suit. You two should tour as comedians, Myra said with a sigh, if it weren't for, the intergalactic incident hanging over our heads. Suddenly, the lights flickered, momentarily painting the bar in shadows. The patrons, well accustomed to the Crucible's eccentricities, barely flinched. Myra, however, felt a knot form in her stomach. That's not ominous at all, she muttered, casting a look at Tomlin. You think it's related? Probably just the usual Crucible charm, he replied, but his eyes told a different story. On the Crucible, nothing was ever just usual. The bartender, a creature with more limbs than a centipede's family reunion, swept by collecting empty glasses. Power surges, it said, its voice a soothing hum. Happens when someone tries to hack the wiring. Charming place, Kim commented. Bet the liability insurance around here is a killer. Well, Bale said, standing up from the table, unless we want to find out if these drinks are flammable, maybe we should get moving. Leaving the bar's strange comfort behind, they ventured into the maze of corridors that made up the Crucible. A place where architectural logic went to die, and you were more likely to find a knife in your back than a welcoming committee. Let's split up, Tomlin suggested, because apparently bad ideas were in vogue this season. Cover more ground, find information, or at least a map that makes sense. Brilliant, Myra said, trying not to think of the dozen ways this could go wrong. Because horror movies were always educational, with reluctant nods the group dispersed, each taking a different corridor. Myra found herself walking alongside Kim, who carried the kind of confidence that suggested she could make friends with a black hole if it came to it. Where do you think we should start? Myra asked. Kim shrugged. Wherever they keep the information, or at least a decent cup of coffee. Whichever comes first. As they walked, the Crucible's labyrinthine design seemed to twist around them, corridors branching off like the arteries of some great beast. Every so often, they'd pass a door with ominous insignias or hear the distant hum of machinery, the whole place vibrating with the tension of a dozen species trying very hard not to kill each other. "Look at this place," Kim said, shaking her head. "It's like the universe's worst flea market. All that's missing is someone hawking knockoff designer bags." "You should see the bidding wars," Myra replied. "I hear they are almost as bloody as the politics." They turned a corner, and the corridor widened into what could generously be called a lobby. A large, circular space with a domed ceiling and several exits. It was the kind of place that screamed trap in a dozen languages. And standing in the center of it was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a stance that suggested trouble came naturally to them. Captain Jackson Dre, a human pilot Myra vaguely remembered from some mission that involved more explosions than she liked to recall. "Well, if it isn't Dr. Quell and Company," Dre said with a grin that could power a small city. "Fancy meeting you in a place like this, Captain Dre," Myra replied, wary. "What brings you to this charming corner of hell?" "Same as you, I bet," he said, eyes glinting with mischief. "Trying to keep the galaxy from imploding. Nice hobby if you can get it." Kim stepped forward, crossing her arms. "We heard about power surges." "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Dre feigned innocence, the picture of someone who'd never even heard of the concept of sabotage. "Power surges, here, I'm shocked." "Shocked," Kim repeated, her tone flatter than an open space map. "Right." Myra started to ask another question, but a faint sound caught her attention. A low hum growing louder by the second, like an approaching swarm of mechanical bees. And it was coming from one of the side corridors. "That doesn't sound good," Kim said, echoing Myra's thoughts. Dre's grin widened, an expression that seemed to suggest he was in his element. "Oh, I'd start running if I were you." The hum turned into a roar as a swarm of small drones burst into the room, their sleek, metallic forms glinting under the harsh lights. Clearly not the welcome committee, unless the committee had developed a taste for violence. "Move!" Dre shouted, taking his own advice as he sprinted towards one of the exits. Myra and Kim were right behind him, dodging the drones that zipped past with alarming speed. The drones, clearly built for more than just intimidation, began firing stun blasts, the air crackling with energy. Myra felt a rush of adrenaline, the kind that came with realizing how close you'd just come to being fried. "Who the hell brings drones to a diplomatic arena?" Myra shouted over the noise, ducking as one of the little nightmares zipped overhead. "Someone who skipped the manual on peace talks," Dre replied, skidding around a corner and leading them into another corridor. "Tomlin," Myra called into her comm, hoping their fearless leader wasn't currently being vaporized. "We've got drones. Angry ones, how copy?" "Copy," Tomlin's voice crackled back, breathless. "We're pinned down in Sector C. Any bright ideas?" "Working on it," Myra said, racing after Dre and Kim. "And by working on it, I mean running very fast." They burst into another corridor, one that mercifully seemed devoid of anything with a grudge and a weaponized chassis. Dre skidded to a halt, turning to face them with an expression that was somehow both exhilarated and apologetic. "Sorry about that," he said, as if they'd just stumbled out of a particularly intense game of tag. "Guess some folks aren't fans of our diplomatic efforts." "You don't say," Myra replied, catching her breath. "Who's behind this? Any guesses?" Dre shrugged, the kind of shrug that suggested he'd been asked to explain the entire Galactic Senate's budget cuts. "Could be anyone, but if I had to bet, I'd say someone's looking to exploit your little bacteria problem for some personal gain." Kim shook her head. "Of course. Nothing like a galaxy-ending threat to bring out the opportunists." "Exactly," Dre agreed. "Now, if we want to avoid ending up on the wrong side of a laser cannon, we might want to regroup. I've got a ship nearby. It's not pretty, but it's faster than those drones." "Fast is good," Myra said, peering back down the corridor, half expecting the drones to reappear at any moment. "Lead the way." As they moved, Dre kept up a steady stream of chatter, the kind of inane banter that was at once comforting and distracting. "You know, this reminds me of that time on Crag 7. We had these reactor leaks, and you'd think the place was about to explode, but turns out it was just a faulty alarm system. Kim gave him a look that could freeze water on a tropical planet. Fascinating. How'd it end? Dre grinned. We blew the reactor, of course, but not before we got everyone out. So happy ending. Sounds like our kind of luck, Myra muttered. They reached a hangar bay, Dre leading them to a ship that could generously be described as used. It bore the scars of many adventures, the hull patched in places with what looked suspiciously like duct tape and worn optimism. Welcome aboard the Talon, Dre said with a flourish. She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts. Just get us off this rock, Kim said, already heading up the ramp. The interior of the Talon was as haphazard as the exterior, with wires and conduits snaking across the ceiling like an electrician's nightmare. But the engines roared to life with a satisfying rumble, the kind that suggested this ship had far more speed than style. As they lifted off, Myra felt a brief moment of relief, the kind that came only when you realized you'd narrowly avoided being turned into space dust. But it was short-lived, a nagging thought tugging at the back of her mind. Whoever did this, she said, looking at Dre, they're going to try again. We need to figure out who's behind it. Dre nodded, his expression turning serious. And we will. But first, let's make sure we don't get shot down before we get the chance. Myra glanced around the cockpit, where the others were strapping in and preparing for what was sure to be a rough ride. The galaxy was vast, uncaring, and filled with people who wouldn't hesitate to turn on you for a quick credit. But they had each other, and as far as she was concerned, that was one hell of an asset. Right then, she said, settling into her seat. Let's go save the galaxy, one disaster at a time. Tomlin, adjusting his harness, chuckled. And if we don't, at least we'll have one hell of a story to tell. In the vast, uncaring expanse of space, it was the small comforts that kept you going. And if those comforts came with a side of dark humor and the occasional brush with death, well, that was just the way of the universe. As the Talon jettisoned from the crucible with all the grace of a drunken chicken, Myra settled back in her seat, an uneasy weight settling in her stomach. The crucible, always a hotbed of political intrigue and cheap whiskey, had once again proven itself as reliable as a politician's promise. The galaxy was vast, mostly empty, and generally preferred if you kept your existential crises to yourself. Yet here they were, babysitting a bacterial nightmare while dodging drones like some cosmic bullseye. Dre's steady chatter filled the cockpit, the sort of noise that could drown out impending doom if only for a moment. Myra didn't trust quiet. It usually meant reality was about to sucker punch you. Kim, on the other hand, was leaning back, arms crossed and eyes narrowed like she was mentally daring the universe to give her another reason to roll them. So, Dre said, tapping buttons and flipping switches like a kid in a candy store. Anyone else think those drones were a bit too enthusiastic for a diplomatic gathering? Just a bit, Kim replied, dripping sarcasm like an overfilled bathtub. Nothing says welcome like a laser to the face. Myra rubbed her temples. Let's not forget why we're here, folks. The bacteria. It's evolving faster than a politician's excuse list, and it's only a matter of time before it spreads beyond Treller Prime. Have you tried turning it off and on again? Dre quipped, earning him a glare from Myra that could have cracked asteroids. Kidding, kidding. But seriously, how bad is it? Bad enough that if we don't figure something out, Earth's going to become the universe's newest exhibit in when science goes wrong, Myra said. And if these alien factions figure out how dangerous it really is, we're looking at intergalactic quarantine, or worse. Yeah, worse is usually my least favorite option, Kim added, drumming her fingers against her armrest. What's the plan? Tomlin's voice crackled through the comm. I've been looking into it. Seems like there's a rogue faction in the Crucible that might be trying to weaponize the bacteria. They're banking on chaos. You know, the usual Tuesday. Great, Myra muttered. Because nothing says day at the office like bioengineered pandemics and galactic politics. Dre adjusted their course, aiming the Talon towards Treller Prime. Well, buckle up, kiddos, we're going in. And let's try not to start an interstellar incident, shall we? The planet loomed large ahead, a swirling ball of clouds and tension. Trellar Prime had resources every faction wanted, but right now it felt more like the universe's angriest hornet's nest, and they were about to poke it with a very big stick. The landing was smoother than Myra expected, which was to say they didn't crash. The Talon touched down in a remote area of Trellar Prime, far from prying eyes and the kind of scrutiny that usually ended with someone getting vaporized. They disembarked, Myra clutching her datapad like a talisman against the madness of the universe. "First stop," she said, looking at her makeshift crew, "find out if this bacteria's been tampered with and by who. Second stop, make sure it doesn't turn this planet into a Petri dish nightmare." Dre grinned, pulling a small blaster from his belt. "I love it when a plan comes together, especially one that doesn't involve me getting shot." They set off, navigating the rocky terrain with a mix of caution and desperation. Myra couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched, an itch at the back of her mind she couldn't scratch. Tomlin's information pointed to a rogue faction, and if they had any hope of stopping the bacteria from spreading, they needed answers. The landscape was a testament to nature's ability to make you feel insignificant. Jagged rocks loomed overhead, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the ground. It would be beautiful if it wasn't so damned ominous. Bale, their resident jokester with a fondness for gallows humor, spoke up as they trudged forward. "So, what exactly are we looking for?" "A big sign that says evil lair this way." "Something like that," Kim replied. "Except if we find it, it's probably a trap. Because why make our lives easy?" "Ah, the classic walk into a trap strategy," Bale said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Can't fail." As they rounded a bend, they spotted a small outpost nestled between two rocky outcrops. It looked innocuous enough, but Myra knew better than to trust appearances. It was probably as welcoming as a rabid wolf. They approached cautiously, weapons drawn and senses on high alert. The outpost was quiet, eerily so, like the universe was holding its breath. Myra's grip tightened on her datapad, her heart pounding a steady rhythm of impending doom. "Tomlin, we're at the outpost," Myra whispered into the comm. "Looks like no one's home, but I'm not buying it. Any intel on what we might find inside?" "Just the usual," Tomlin replied. "Secret labs, nefarious plots, maybe a cafeteria with bad coffee. Be careful." Dre took point, nudging open the door with the barrel of his blaster. "Anyone home? We're here for the Apocalypse Planning Committee." The interior was dimly lit, the kind of lighting that screamed bad things happen here. Equipment lined the walls, the hum of machinery filling the air with an unsettling rhythm. Myra's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of the bacteria or whoever might be trying to use it for nefarious purposes. "Looks like we missed the party," Kim noted, kicking a chair lightly with her boot. "Or maybe we're just early." Myra's attention was drawn to a terminal blinking near the back, its screen displaying data that sent a shiver down her spine. "This is it," she said, moving closer. "This is where they're controlling the bacteria." Bale peered over her shoulder, eyes wide. "And what does it say? Congratulations, you've unleashed hell on the universe." "Something like that," Myra muttered, tapping keys with a mix of frustration and urgency. "Looks like the bacteria is more adaptable than we thought. If it gets loose, it could spread beyond Trellar Prime in days." "Fantastic," Dre said, voice dripping with irony. "We always wanted to be legends, just not in this way." Kim scanned the room, her gaze landing on a series of vials neatly lined up on a nearby table. "Looks like someone's been busy. These could be the source." She picked up a vial, frowning at the liquid inside. It was the same faint green hue of the bacteria she'd seen in countless nightmares since this whole fiasco began. "So, what now? Do we smash them and hope for the best?" Myra shook her head, already working through a plan. "We need to analyze these samples, figure out what makes them tick and how to stop them." "And how do we do that without turning ourselves into ground zero?" Bale asked, looking pointedly at the vials like they were about to sprout legs and walk away. Carefully, Myra replied, pocketing a vial with the kind of care usually reserved for handling live explosives. Before they could move, a noise from behind made them freeze, a soft metallic clatter that echoed through the room. Dre spun around, weapon raised, eyes scanning for the source. "Looks like we've got company," he said, voice low, tension threading through his words. Emerging from the shadows was a figure wrapped in a cloak that seemed to absorb the light. "I see you found our little hobby," the figure said, voice smooth as silk, dangerous as a loaded gun. "And I was just getting to the gift shop," Kim quipped, although her grip on her weapon didn't falter. The figure laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down Myra's spine. "You're in over your heads, humans. This is beyond your comprehension." "Funny," Bale said, stepping forward with a confidence that belied the situation. "We get that a lot, usually from people who end up regretting it." The figure seemed unfazed, the kind of calm that suggested they held all the cards. "The bacteria is a tool, a means to an end. You can't stop it." "Watch us," Myra said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The figure tilted their head, studying them with something akin to curiosity. Brave words, but bravery doesn't count for much out here. Before Myra could respond, the figure pressed a button on a device in their hand. The sound of machinery whirring to life filled the room, a sound Myra recognized with a jolt of horror. It was the containment system for the bacteria being deactivated. "Time's up," the figure said, turning to leave. Dre didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, tackling the figure to the ground as the rest of them scrambled to stop the deactivation. Kim and Bale were by the terminal in an instant, working together to override the command. Myra watched the struggle, heart pounding, every second stretching into eternity. The figure struggled beneath Dre, but he held firm, determination etched into every line of his face. Kim cursed under her breath, fingers flying over the controls. "Come on, come on." With a final keystroke, the system re-engaged, the hum of containment returning. Myra released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, relief washing over her. Dre hauled the figure to their feet, pulling back the hood to reveal a face that was vaguely familiar. A former advisor from the Crucible, someone who'd sworn loyalty to peace and diplomacy. Or so they'd claimed. "Looks like your plan didn't go so well," Dre said, a triumphant smirk playing at his lips. The advisor glared back, defiance in their eyes. "This isn't over. The factions will never let Earth survive once they know the truth. Then we'll just have to make sure they don't find out," Myra replied, her voice cool, controlled. "Let's wrap this up." Tomlin's voice crackled again over the comm, urgency threading through every word. "We've got a galaxy to save, remember." "Wouldn't want to miss that," Bale said, his humor a welcome balm against the storm of uncertainty swirling around them. As they secured the advisor and prepared to leave, Myra couldn't help but wonder if they were merely delaying the inevitable. The universe was a vast, uncaring place, and they were just a few souls trying to keep the darkness at bay. But for now, they had a chance, a slim, fleeting chance to make a difference, and sometimes that was enough. The Crucible's council chambers were as welcoming as a firing squad, which was appropriate, considering the stakes. Myra and her team sat in the gallery, waiting for the council's decision on Earth's future. It felt as if the universe was holding its breath, which, in Myra's experience, usually meant something was about to explode. "So, any bets on how fast they decide to sell us out?" Bale whispered, leaning back in his chair with a nonchalance that belied the tension tightening his jaw. Kim snorted. "I'm putting 5 credits on immediate betrayal. These guys wouldn't know loyalty if it bit them in the ass." "Can't say I blame them," Dre added, eyes flicking to the council members like he was sizing up his next target. "They've got the collective morals of a hungry shark." Myra rubbed her temples, trying to stave off the headache that felt like it was being orchestrated by a sadistic symphony conductor. The council, a mix of species that had more in common with a zoo than any governing body, was supposedly debating the fate of humanity. They looked about as concerned with the galaxy's problems as a cat with a sunbeam. Across the room, Vorin, The enigmatic alien strategist with a penchant for cryptic statements stood motionless. His presence was like an unspoken threat, a reminder of the power he wielded. Myra couldn't decide if he was on their side or just playing a very long game of chess with the universe. "Do you ever get the feeling we're just fleas arguing over who's got the best dog?" Myra muttered, eyes fixed on the council. "Pretty sure we're the fleas that are about to get squashed," Bale replied, his grin as sharp as a knife. Meanwhile, back on Treller Prime, the bacterial threat wasn't taking a break for intergalactic politics. The outpost, now secure, was a ticking time bomb, and the seconds were slipping away like sand through a sieve. If the council didn't act soon, or at all, the bacteria would spread faster than a rumor at a high school reunion. "Rax still hasn't checked in," Myra noted, glancing at her datapad like it might conjure a miracle. "Either he's found something game-changing or he's discovered an interesting way to get dead." "Given our luck, probably both," Kim said, stretching her legs out. "But hey, at least we'll have a front-row seat to our own destruction. That's something, right?" "Optimism's overrated anyway," Dre added, his voice a dry rasp. "I prefer my glasses half empty. That way they're easier to throw." The council's deliberations dragged on, each moment stretching into an eternity of well-dressed boredom. Myra could practically hear the bacteria laughing at their incompetence. She knew her team was running on fumes, their resolve tested beyond the limits. But giving up wasn't an option, at least not until the galaxy was officially outlawed. Eventually, Vorin stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chamber like a scalpel. "The council has decided," he announced, his tone as unreadable as his expression. "Earth's fate is tied to your success. The bacteria must be contained or the consequences will be dire." "Real specific," Kim muttered, her sarcasm a shield against the rising panic. "Thanks for the clarity, you oversized crypt keeper." Vorin's gaze landed on her, and for a brief moment Myra thought she saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You have little time," he said, ignoring the barb with the ease of someone who had heard much worse. "Do not waste it." "Wouldn't dream of it," Myra replied, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling in her chest. As they made their way out of the chamber, Myra's mind raced with the implications. The council had effectively given them a deadline without any real support. It was like being handed a grenade with the pin already pulled. "Well, that was fun," Bale said as they reconvened in the corridor. "I can't wait to see what fresh hell awaits us down below." "Let's focus on not dying first," Myra said, her mind already churning through strategies. "We need to get back to the outpost and make sure we've got this bacteria under control." "Assuming we can beat the clock," Dre added, checking his blaster as if it were a lucky charm. "And the galaxy's penchant for screwing us over." They made their way back to the Talon, the ship's familiar rattle a comforting reminder that even in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, some things never changed. Myra settled into the pilot's seat, her hands moving over the controls with the kind of precision that came from practice and a healthy fear of exploding. "Ready for another smooth landing?" Myra asked, shooting a sidelong glance at Bale. "Define smooth," Bale replied, strapping himself in. "Because I think we've got different dictionaries." The Talon lifted off, the roar of the engines a promise of both salvation and destruction, depending on how things played out. As they broke through the atmosphere, Myra couldn't help but wonder if they were flying into their final confrontation, or just the next chapter in a never-ending saga of cosmic absurdity. "Dre, what's the status on the containment?" Myra asked, focusing on the task at hand. "We need to know what we're dealing with." "Best guess," Dre said, his eyes scanning the readouts. "We've got a few hours, maybe less, before this stuff hits critical mass. Unless we stop it, Treller Prime becomes ground zero for a new galactic plague." "Great," Kim said, throwing her hands up. "So basically, we're the universe's janitors and someone just spilled the nastiest space sludge imaginable." "Nice to be appreciated," Bale said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I've always wanted to die doing something pointless." As they neared the outpost, Myra's thoughts drifted to Rax. Wherever he was, she hoped he'd found something, anything, that could tip the scales in their favor. But knowing their luck, he was probably neck-deep in trouble or worse. "Let's get this over with," Myra said, determination hardening her voice. "We've got a planet to save and a universe that doesn't care if we fail." The landing was as rough as ever, the Talon touching down with a groan of protest. Myra led the charge out of the ship, the familiar landscape of Trellar Prime stretching before them like a twisted promise. Inside the outpost, the air was thick with tension, the hum of machinery a constant reminder of what they were up against. Myra's heart thudded in her chest, an echo of the urgency thrumming through her veins. "All right," she said, addressing her team with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. "We need to stabilize the containment and find out if there's a way to reverse this. Dre, you're on security. Kim Bale, you're with me." "Let's do this," Kim said, her words a rallying cry against the encroaching darkness. As they worked, the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second bringing them closer to the brink. Myra's head spun with calculations and probabilities, a mental dance that left her dizzy and exhausted. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. A sudden noise made her look up, heart lurching in her chest. It was Rax, stumbling through the door with a look of wild desperation in his eyes. "Rax," Myra called, relief crashing over her like a wave. "Where the hell have you been?" "Research facility," Rax gasped, clutching a data chip like it was the Holy Grail. "I've got the answers we need, but we're running out of time." "More bad news, in other words," Bale said, but his grin was genuine as he clapped Rax on the back. "Lay it on us," Kim said, her eyes narrowing with determination. "What have we got?" Rax plugged the chip into the terminal, and the room was filled with a flurry of data. Myra leaned in, her eyes scanning the readouts with the kind of intensity that only comes when you're 2 breaths away from disaster. "It's a control mechanism," Rax explained, his voice a rush of words. "A way to stabilize the bacteria, maybe even reverse the spread." "But it's risky, like we might all die anyway." "Risky. That's my favorite kind of risky," Dre said from the doorway, his blaster dangling from his fingers. "Let's roll the dice." "What's the alternative?" Myra asked, her voice steady even as her mind raced. "A slow and painful demise," Rax replied, not missing a beat. "Sounds like a party," Bale chimed in, already moving to help implement the solution. As they worked, the air crackled with energy, every movement charged with the possibility of salvation or destruction. Myra's heart pounded in her ears, a drumbeat of anxiety that refused to be silenced. The minutes ticked by, each one a countdown to either triumph or oblivion. Myra could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders, a burden she bore with the grim determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Almost there," Rax muttered, his fingers flying over the controls with a speed born of desperation. "Let's hope this works," Kim said, her eyes flicking to Myra's. "Because if it doesn't, I'm blaming you." "Just so you know." "Glad to have your support," Myra replied, her tone wry even as her hands shook with adrenaline. With a final keystroke, the mechanism engaged, the hum of machinery shifting to a steady, reassuring rhythm. Myra's breath caught in her throat, a hope she dared not name rising within her. "Did it work?" Bale asked, his voice a mixture of anticipation and dread. Rax checked the readouts, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Looks like it," he said, his relief palpable. "We've contained the bacteria, at least for now." The words were like a balm, soothing the ragged edges of Myra's nerves. They had done it. Against all odds, they had managed to stave off disaster. For now, at least. "Guess we're not dead yet," Dre said, a grin spreading across his face. "Speak for yourself," Kim replied, her sarcasm a familiar comfort. "I'm pretty sure I died a little inside." As they settled back, the adrenaline fading to a dull thrum, Myra allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the fight wasn't over yet. It never was. The Talon's engines whined their protest as the team touched down on Trellar Prime. Myra Quell, with eyes red from lack of sleep and caffeine levels pushing the limits of human tolerance, led the charge out of the ship like a general storming a battlefield made entirely of stress and impending doom. "Home sweet home," Bale quipped, adjusting his blaster strap. "More like home sweaty home," Kim shot back, already wiping a film of perspiration from her brow. "Why is it always so damn muggy here?" "Because Treller Prime cares as much about your comfort as the Council does about our survival," Dre said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Inside the outpost, the machinery hummed a mechanical symphony, a reminder of the ticking clock they danced around. Myra glanced at the blinking consoles, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and half-formed plans, none of which screamed "definitely won't kill us." "All right, team," Myra said, rallying her motley crew. "We've got a glimmer of hope, but it's about as trustworthy as a used starship dealer. Meaning it's likely to blow up in our faces," Bale added, ever the optimist. "Exactly. But I think we can reverse the bacteria's effects using a compound derived from human DNA," Myra continued, her eyes flicking to each team member in turn. "Human DNA?" Kim asked, her skepticism as thick as the air. "Why do I feel like this involves more needles than I'm comfortable with?" "Because it does," Myra replied with a tight smile. "But it's also our best shot. The compound can stabilize the bacteria, maybe even reverse it. Maybe." Dre raised an eyebrow. "I love it when our survival hinges on a maybe. Better than a definite we're screwed," Rax pointed out, still nursing a bruise from his last escapade. "Okay, so we have a plan," Myra said, ignoring the snark and focusing on the task. "We need resources to synthesize the compound. The Crucible's got what we need, but it's going to be like shopping during a galactic sale. Chaotic and potentially fatal." "Sounds like a blast," Bale said dryly. "What's the catch?" "The catch is we need to outsmart the local thugs and council goons," Myra replied. "And we're going to use the arena's environment to our advantage, of course," Kim sighed. "Why just risk our necks when we can juggle flaming swords at the same time?" "Exactly the spirit I was hoping for," Myra said. "Let's gear up and move out. We've got a universe to maybe sort of save." The outpost's supply closet was a treasure trove of questionable engineering and broken dreams. Myra picked through the gear, tossing aside anything that looked like it would explode for reasons other than intended. Dre chuckled, holding up a device covered in more duct tape than metal. "Think this thing's older than the galaxy." "Perfect," Myra replied, taking it from him. "It'll fit right in." Back aboard the Talon, the team prepared for their journey to the Crucible. The ship's controls felt solid under Myra's fingers, a small comfort in the chaos of their current existence. "Ready for another bumpy ride?" Myra asked, her voice light despite the tension. "With you at the helm, I'd be worried if it wasn't," Bale replied, strapping himself into his seat. "What's a bit of turbulence between friends?" The Talon lifted off, engines groaning like an old man getting out of bed. Myra guided them through the void with a deftness born of experience and a healthy disregard for safety protocols. "So what's the plan when we get there?" Kim asked over the comms crackle. "We stage a little diversion," Myra answered. "Get the locals riled up with a few well-placed rumors while we slip in and grab what we need." "Ah, the classic poke the hornet's nest strategy," Dre said. "Always a crowd pleaser. Let's just hope we're not the ones getting stung," Rax added, checking his gear. As they approached the Crucible, the asteroid's jagged silhouette loomed ahead, a haven for those with questionable morals and even more questionable hygiene. The team steeled themselves for the chaos, hearts pounding with adrenaline and anticipation. Touching down, Myra announced, guiding the Talon into a landing that was only marginally smoother than a crash. The hangar bay was a cacophony of clanging metal and shouted deals, the kind of place where you could buy a black market engine part and get stabbed in the back over the price. "Stick together," Myra said, leading her team into the melee, "and try not to look like you're up to something. We don't need more attention than we can handle." "That's my specialty," Bale said, slipping into the crowd with all the subtlety of a space cat burglar. The arena was alive with activity, the kind of place where you could lose your shirt, your ship, and your dignity in one fell swoop. Myra navigated the chaos with practiced ease, her mind a constant swirl of plans and contingencies. They headed to a section of the crucible known for its under-the-table trades, a place where loyalty was as rare as a full tank of fuel. As they moved, Myra could feel the eyes on them, the weight of suspicion lingering in the air like a bad smell. "Let's make this quick," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time before someone figures out we're not just here for the ambience." Kim snorted. "I've seen nicer decor in a prison cell. Focus, people," Dre said, eyes scanning the crowd for potential threats. They approached a vendor with a reputation for having the kind of goods you wouldn't want your grandmother to know about. A shifty-looking alien with more scars than sense greeted them, his smile as trustworthy as a politician's promise. "What can I do for you fine folks today?" he asked, his voice oily and unctuous. "We're looking for some specific materials," Myra replied, keeping her tone cool and detached. "And we're willing to pay well or pay now," the vendor asked, eyes gleaming with avarice. "Pay once we see the goods," Bale interjected, his hand resting casually on his blaster. "Smart," the vendor said, nodding. "I like smart. Let's talk business." As they negotiated, Myra's thoughts raced. They needed the compound. Without it, any chance of saving Treller Prime would evaporate faster than a politician's promise post-election. The transaction was smooth, all things considered. Myra handed over a case of credits, and the vendor produced a package wrapped in layers of protective foil. "Pleasure doing business," he said, eyeing them like a hawk circling for a second helping. "Likewise," Myra replied, tucking the package securely into her jacket. "Now let's get the hell out of here." They turned to leave, but Rax's voice stopped them cold. Guys, we might have a problem." He nodded towards a group of council enforcers moving through the crowd, their eyes scanning the throng with practiced suspicion. "Perfect," Kim muttered. "Just what we needed." A welcoming committee split up, Myra ordered, her mind working overtime. "We'll meet back at the ship, and try not to get caught. What's life without a little excitement?" Bale quipped, slipping into the crowd with the ease of a shadow. As they scattered, Myra's heart raced. The enforcers were closing in, their expressions as inviting as a death sentence. She ducked into an alley, hoping her instincts would guide her through the maze. The crucible was a labyrinth of corridors and dead ends, each turn a potential trap. Myra navigated with the kind of reckless abandon that came from having no other choice, her mind a whirl of adrenaline and desperation. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with an enforcer. Thinking quickly, she feigned a stumble, mumbling an apology as she slipped past. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she kept moving, driven by the urgency of their mission. Finally, she reached the hangar, breathless but exhilarated. The Talon loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in the chaos. One by one, her team filtered in, each arrival a testament to their resourcefulness and luck. "Everyone make it?" Myra asked, casting a quick glance over her team. "More or less," Dre replied, sporting a new cut over his eyebrow. "But I think we've worn out our welcome." "Then let's not stick around," she said, firing up the engines. The Talon roared to life, a mechanical symphony that set her nerves at ease. As they lifted off, leaving the crucible behind, Myra couldn't help but smile. They had the compound, a glimmer of hope in their desperate struggle, but the battle was far from over. "Now comes the hard part," Myra said, her voice a mix of determination and exhaustion. "Harder than sneaking past council goons?" Kim asked, raising an eyebrow. "Much harder," Myra replied, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "But if we pull this off, we might just save Treller Prime, and maybe our skins in the process," Bale added. As they hurtled through space, the weight of their mission settled over them like a shroud. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of hope, a tiny, stubborn flame refusing to be extinguished. Because in this vast, indifferent galaxy, sometimes all you had was the fight, and sometimes that was enough. The Talon lurched as it entered Treller Prime's atmosphere, swaying like a drunk at last call. Myra gripped the controls with white knuckles, her mind juggling a dozen potential disasters. Of course, one of them was the prospect of the whole planet going belly up thanks to a bacteria designed by folks with questionable ethics and even worse safety standards. "Everyone ready?" She called out over the ship's intercom, though her question was more a formality than a necessity. Considering their luck, readiness was relative. "As ready as a pig at a barbecue," Bale replied from his station, checking his blaster with a casual shrug. "Let's hope we're the ones doing the roasting." "Optimism, thy name is Bale," Dre chimed in, cynicism dripping from his words like oil from a leaky engine. "What's the plan again?" "Drive the bacteria back with a stern talking to." "Funny," Myra shot back, her voice tight with concentration. "We're deploying the compound as soon as we hit ground. It's our one-shot wonder, so let's not screw it up." "Piece of cake," Kim muttered, strapping herself into her seat. "If that cake were made of explosives and disappointments." The Talon touched down with a graceless thud that rattled everyone's teeth. Myra flipped switches with the deftness of a caffeine-fueled octopus, bringing the ship to an uneasy halt. The airlock hissed open, releasing a blast of muggy air that smelled like boiled socks in desperation. "Welcome back to paradise," Rax grumbled, adjusting his gear. "If we're lucky, we'll leave with all our limbs intact this time." "Let's aim for that," Myra said, leading the way out. Their boots hit the ground with a determined stomp, setting the pace for what was shaping up to be a day full of surprises. The outpost was barely more than a cluster of prefab buildings, each one a testament to the peril of budget cuts and shoddy construction. Their destination loomed ahead, a research facility fortified to withstand anything short of a supernova, or so the brochure claimed. Myra's comm crackled to life, Tomlin's voice a distant whisper. "We've got your coordinates." "You sure this is gonna work?" "It has to," Myra replied, her voice firmer than her confidence. "We're out of options." Inside, the facility hummed with nervous energy, a mix of fear and grim determination. Myra's team moved with purpose, unfazed by the chaos around them. They'd seen worse. Hell, they'd been worse. "Okay, remember the plan," Myra instructed, her mind racing. "Bale and Dre, you're on defense. Kim, you're with me. Rax, keep an eye on those readings. If anything goes south, I want to know before it hits rock bottom." "I love it when you talk dirty," Bale quipped, flashing a grin that could melt glaciers or start a bar fight. With the compound secured, Myra and Kim made their way to the control room, dodging scientists who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made you want to scream or punch something, preferably inanimate. The interface was a mess of tangled wires and blinking lights, but Myra's fingers danced over it with practiced ease. She punched in the sequence, feeling the room hold its collective breath. "Here goes nothing," she said, hitting the final key with a flourish. The facility rumbled like a giant stomach, the machinery springing to life in a symphony of whirs and clicks. The compound began its journey, a chemical cocktail designed to kick bacterial ass and take names. "Is it working?" Rax's voice crackled over the comm, laced with uncertainty. "Give it a minute," Myra replied, eyes glued to the monitors. "It's not magic, just science on a shoestring budget." The screen flickered, then steadied, showing the compound's progress. Myra's heart pounded in sync with the data, each blip a promise of hope or doom. "Looks like it's holding," Kim reported, relief lacing her words. "At least for now." "Well, isn't that a kick in the teeth?" Dre said, his voice carrying over the comm. "Looks like we might just pull this off." "Never doubted us for a second," Bale added, though his tone suggested he doubted plenty. The tension in the room eased a fraction, the collective sigh of relief almost palpable, but Myra knew better than to relax just yet. The galaxy had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. "Let's keep an eye on things," she said, her mind already shifting to potential contingencies. "And be ready to bolt if it all goes to hell." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Kim replied, her eyes scanning the screens with renewed focus. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. But slowly, surely, the bacteria began to retreat, its influence waning like a villain in a bad Hollywood. Hope flickered in the eyes of the scientists around them, a fragile flame kindled by the impossible. "Looks like we did it," Rax said, awe creeping into his voice. "We actually did it. Don't sound so surprised," Myra replied, though she couldn't keep the grin from her face. "Now we just have to survive long enough to bask in the glory." As if on cue, the facility's alarms blared, a cacophony that set nerves on edge. Myra's grin faded, replaced by a grimace of annoyance. "It was never easy, was it?" "What now?" Bale asked, already moving towards the exit. "Enforcer welcoming party," Dre reported, eyes scanning the perimeter. "Looks like they're not too happy about our miracle cure." "Of course not," Myra sighed. "Why thank us when you can shoot us instead?" The team regrouped with the kind of efficiency born from experience and sheer stubbornness. They moved through the facility, the compound's success a beacon in the encroaching storm. "Time to go," Myra said, pulling her blaster with a resigned sigh. "Let's not overstay our welcome. More like let's not end up in a cell," Kim added, her steps quickening. "I've had enough hospitality for one day." They made their way through the facility, adrenaline surging in their veins. The enforcers closed in, their intentions as clear as a death threat. "Split to the ship." "Same plan as before," Myra ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And try not to get shot." "No promises," Bale called back, his blaster ready. As they reached the exit, a squad of enforcers appeared, weapons drawn. Myra's heart dropped, but she forced herself to stay calm. They'd wriggled out of tighter spots before. With a nod to her team, she raised her blaster. Time for some diplomacy. Bullets and plasma bolts flew, lighting up the corridor like a macabre festival. Myra ducked behind an overturned table, firing back with grim determination. Her team moved with practiced precision, each covering the other in a deadly dance. "Got anything witty to say now, Bale?" Dre shouted over the din, a grin in his voice. "Not really," Bale replied, his own voice tight with concentration. "But I do have a fondness for not getting shot." Kim took a shot at an enforcer, forcing him back. "We need a way out, Myra." "Working on it," Myra replied, her mind racing. She glanced around, spotting a service hatch halfway hidden behind debris. There, the team fought their way to the hatch, covering each other with grim determination. Myra yanked it open, gesturing for her team to go through. "After you," Rax said with a wry grin, holding his position. "Ladies first," Myra replied, ducking through the hatch. They scrambled through the narrow passage, the sounds of battle fading behind them. Myra led the way, heart pounding with adrenaline and hope. Their path opened up into a maintenance bay, the Talon waiting like a faithful dog. The team spilled out, rushing towards their ship. "Let's get the hell out of here," Myra said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "Music to my ears," Bale replied, taking up his position. The Talon's engines roared to life, defiant and unyielding. Myra guided it away from Treller Prime, leaving the chaos behind. The ship hummed with the promise of safety, the stars stretching out before them. "Think we've earned a drink now?" Dre asked, sagging into his seat. "I'd say so," Myra replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "First round's on me." Bale chuckled, his relief palpable. "Just as long as it's not that swill from the crucible." As they settled in for the journey, the knowledge of their success buoyed them, a rare victory in a galaxy that rarely gave second chances. "Here's to saving planets and annoying council enforcers," Kim said, raising an imaginary glass. Myra nodded, the weight of their achievement sinking in. They'd done the impossible, and for once, the universe seemed to agree. The bacteria was contained, Treller Prime saved by their hands. "Not bad for a bunch of humans," Tomlin's voice crackled over the comm, admiration evident. Myra leaned back, letting the hum of the Talon wash over her. "Not bad at all," she agreed, her heart lighter than it had been in ages. Because sometimes in a vast, indifferent galaxy, even the smallest victory was worth celebrating. The Talon docked back at the Crucible with a familiar clunk that felt more like a weary sigh than a celebratory fanfare. The spaceport's usual ambience of chaotic politics and cheap whiskey greeted them, all under the dim glow of malfunctioning lights. Myra Quell rubbed her eyes, which felt like two dried raisins after their latest escapade. She could practically feel the caffeine wearing off, her body protesting like an overworked bureaucrat. Back to the heart of dysfunction, Bale muttered, unbuckling his harness with the grace of a half-awake sloth. He twirled his blaster like a gunslinger with nowhere to go. Kim stretched, her joints making sounds reminiscent of ancient machinery. I'd say it's good to be back, but I'd rather be anywhere with a working bathroom and a decent bar. Dream big, darling, Myra replied, grabbing her jacket. But first things first. We've got some negotiating to do. The crew disembarked, their collective footsteps echoing like a funeral march. Victory was a rare beast in their line of work, and savoring it felt as foreign as an honest politician. They made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the Crucible, brushing past traders, arguing about shipments and enforcers looking for trouble they could bottle and sell. The council chambers awaited, as welcoming as a porcupine in a pillow factory. The council members sat in a semicircle, their expressions varying from bored to mildly disinterested. The leader, a human named Vex, leaned back with the kind of smirk that suggested he was either about to congratulate them or order a firing squad. Myra Quell, Vex began, voice as smooth as a sandpaper kiss. I'm told you did the impossible on Treller Prime. Myra shrugged, feigning modesty with the expertise of someone who knew the value of playing it cool. Yeah, well, you know us. We like our bacteria wrangled and our planets undoomed. The room erupted in polite applause, the kind you'd give at a funeral for someone you didn't particularly like. Myra's team exchanged glances, the shared understanding that this was as good as it got. Vex leaned forward, his eyes sharp like a hawk's beak. And the enforcer incident, misunderstanding, Bale interjected, flashing a grin that could charm the boots off a drill sergeant. They thought shooting us was a good idea. We disagreed. Kim nodded, her expression one of exaggerated innocence. We just had a difference of opinion on the whole alive versus dead thing. Vex's lips curled into a reluctant smile. I see. Well, the council acknowledges your efforts. However, there's still the matter of ensuring this doesn't happen again. Myra took a deep breath, her mind already racing ahead. We need stricter controls on bioengineering tech, and more transparency on projects that could wipe out planets. The room shifted, unease rippling through the council members like a bad smell. Myra pressed on, undeterred by their squirms. We're proposing a joint task force, cross-species. Humans, aliens, anyone willing to keep the universe from turning into a petri dish of doom. Vex raised an eyebrow, a gesture that spoke volumes and none of it particularly supportive. A noble sentiment. But who would lead such an endeavor? Someone with a vested interest in not becoming bacteria chow, Rax quipped, arms folded across his chest. Maybe someone who stared down a bioengineered apocalypse and lived to tell the tale. Implying us, of course, Dre added, a sardonic edge sharpening his words. We're already knee-deep in this mess. Vex considered them, weighing options as if each were a particularly unpleasant dinner guest. Finally, he nodded. Very well. A provisional agreement, then. You'll have our backing to establish this task force. But we expect results, Quell. Don't worry, Myra replied, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. We're quite fond of results. With that, the meeting adjourned, the council dispersing like a flock of well-fed vultures. Myra's team lingered, the enormity of their victory settling over them like a warm, albeit scratchy, blanket. So, Bale said, breaking the silence. We're heroes now. Seems that way, Kim replied, her tone as light as the gravity on a third-rate moon. At least until the next crisis. Myra chuckled softly. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. Lord knows the galaxy won't give us a second to breathe. They made their way to the bar, a dingy establishment nestled in the belly of the Crucible. The kind of place where the drinks were as likely to cause blindness as they were to quench thirst. But it was familiar, and in this part of the universe, familiarity was a comfort worth its weight in gold. The bartender, a surly veteran with a face that could curdle milk, poured them around. Myra raised her glass, the dull clink of outdated glassware a fitting soundtrack to their moment. To us, she said, her voice carrying a blend of triumph and disbelief, and to not dying horribly, and to annoying all the right people, Kim added, raising her glass with a grin. They drank, the fiery liquid a welcome burn down their throats. For a brief, shining moment, they were just a group of friends sharing a hard-earned victory, the weight of the galaxy's problems decidedly not on their shoulders. As the night wore on, stories were told and retold, each more exaggerated than the last. Laughter mingled with the clink of glasses, echoing through the bar like a defiant anthem. Myra leaned back, the world a little brighter if only for a moment. "Think they'll remember us?" Rax asked, his voice slurred with contentment. "Only if we screw up again," Dre replied, his grin a crooked thing of beauty. "Good," Myra said, her eyes closed, savoring the moment. "I like being forgotten. Less pressure." They fell into a comfortable silence, the bar's noise fading into the background. For now they were heroes, their deeds etched into the annals of Crucible's history. But come morning, the galaxy would spin on, indifferent to their triumphs and failures alike. And yet Myra felt a sense of peace, knowing they'd made a difference, however small. They'd faced down the impossible and emerged on the other side, scarred but unbroken. In a universe that thrived on chaos, that was victory enough. As the bar emptied and the lights dimmed, Myra and her team stumbled back to the Talon, their steps unsteady but their spirits high. They'd done it. They'd survived, defied odds, and saved a planet. There'd be other challenges, other crises waiting in the wings. But for now they could rest content in their knowledge that they'd faced the darkness and come out stronger. And in the quiet of the Crucible, as stars winked in the vast, uncaring sky, Myra Quell and her team drifted to sleep, heroes for a day, dreamers for a night, ready to face whatever the dawn would bring.